Hey, how's it going, y'all? It's Akbar, developer advocate at Figma, and I'm here with one of our PMs on the dev mode MCP server, Yarden.
Hey.
And this is a series called Live with Figma, where over the next few weeks, the next coming weeks, we'll be giving updates on new products and how we're developing them as they're continuing to move through beta, as they're continuing to roll out, and we take in feedback.
Starting from the best one.
Starting from the dev mode MCP server, which is a really, really hot topic. And I'd love to just really quickly orient the audience on what MCP is. So why don't we start with an easy one? What does MCP stand for?
What does it stand for, Akbar?
Stands for the Model Context Protocol. And what it does is it allows AI agents to be able to get information from specific apps and services in a stable way. So an app like Figma can start showing design context and surfacing that to your AI agents, whichever model or whichever platform you're using. I'm going to switch over to my slides in a bit just to kind of provide a little bit of a visual aid. But
Basically, while you do that,
yeah,
it's a new way for people to be able to take context from Figma to their code base without copying pasting everything.
Exactly.
TLDR.
And it's a great way to get all the information that you need as you're building your designs into the file. So why don't we take a look really quickly?
Show us the magic.
Yeah. So the dev mode MCP server brings together your design intent and Figma context to help you get better design-informed code gen. And in the world today, AI and our LLMs have been really, really powerful for building out code generation and getting to a prototype that looks really, really close to an end product. And this only gets even better when you bring it forward with an agentic code editor. For example, GitHub Copilot or even Cursor. And this starts bringing in your code base context into AI code generation, so what you're building looks a lot more like your production code. Now, we can take that even further by bringing in Figma design context. Figma design context can help inform your code generation, the models that you're using, on which components need to be used, which patterns need to be used, where the content's coming from, and all the different things, the design intent that your designers and your teams are thinking about as they're continuing to develop. And it helps make that end product all the more realistic. So our MCP server actually takes in a few things for design context. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, like, you might be wondering, what does it mean to share design context with the MCP server? And what that means is that we're actually bringing in the data that's already being used. This can be things like patterns in a design file. This can be things like screenshots. There are often times where it's really helpful for our LLM to have a visual context for what's happening in your design, whether that's for looking at a flow or looking at visual hierarchy. And finally, we also provide pseudocode that helps inform our LLMs on what it is that they're looking at, especially if there's that context already there. And this isn't the code that's going to be generated by your LLM, but it helps inform them and helps them parse what this visual representation of data looks like, as well as content data. So the semantic content data that comes from Figma, these are your layer names, or even the content that's in the design itself. And all this stuff is really, really helpful, even for humans, when it comes to design to code alignment. And it becomes even more helpful for our LLM agents to understand the big picture and understand holistically what's happening in our designs. So why don't we take a look at what this looks like in a file? So we might have a design file like this, where we have all of our different screens. We might have a lot of stuff going on in here. But today, I'm going to focus on this demo environment where we have this desktop screen. And we're going to go ahead and show you what it's like to actually use the MCP server. So why don't we start with showing how to set it up. The first thing that we're going to want to do is switch from design mode to dev mode. And we can click on this toggle or press Shift-D. And once we're there, you'll notice that we already have this one panel here that's called MCP server. The status is already enabled for me. You might have to go and change this from disabled to enabled for your own.
One point here, just because we heard it a lot. At the moment, and we know we're going to improve it very soon, you will only see this section if nothing is selected. So you'll see that if you're selecting something, it disappears. So if you're not seeing it, sorry about that. Click outside for now. We'll get a better UX for it soon.
Another way to find this is by just clicking onto your Figma icon while you're in dev mode, go to Preferences, and then click Enable Dev Mode MCP Server. This will also give you access to MCP server settings that allow you to customize that experience even further. The next thing that we want to do now is to have an agentic code editor that supports MCP. So,
which code editor supports MCP today?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different code editors. Some of the most popular ones include VS Code with Copilot as well as Cursor. I'm going to be using VS Code for this example, but you can do this in any agentic code editor that supports MCP.
Even if we don't have it in our help center. As long as it supports an MCP, you'll be able to run the MCP there.
So in VS Code, the way that this works is I'm going to go ahead and just open up my menu. And the first thing that I'm actually going to do is show you how you can set this up. So I'm going to go to my settings. And there's a few different ways to do this. So there are a few different ways that you can explore this, but I'm just going to show you this one. So we're going to go search for MCP. And now you'll see that there is a button to edit in settings.json. And that will give me this. And right here is where we have our Figma Dev Mode MCP server set up. You'll notice that it's a server-side event MCP. And it's locally hosted. This is the URL that it's being hosted from. This port information is really important. And when you enable the MCP, this also shows up as a notification in Figma. So once we've got this all set up, we'll just make sure that the server is running. It's running over here, but let me just restart it to be safe. And you'll notice down here that we've discovered 3 tools, and we're using our MCP. So this gives us now access to Figma from our agentic code editor and allows us to bring that design context into our coding workflow. So the first thing that we're going to look at here is we have this app running. And let me just make sure that it is actually running. OK, cool. I have the server running. And this is just an example app right now. It just has landing page, a bunch of different components. And for the example today, where we're going to show how to use the MCP to implement something that you have in your Figma design and turn it on, we're actually just going to get rid of all of this extra stuff down here. And we're going to focus on our demo component. So the first thing we have, if we refresh this, oh, it looks like a server isn't actually running. Let's run that one more time. Localhost. And of course, the age-old coding error of not saving. There we go. So now all we have is our header, our footer, and our demo component that's currently empty. Why don't we go ahead and start bringing in some context? So another really key point here is for the MCP to work, you need to have a selection. And I'm going to select this card grid right here. And this data, everything that's in this node and below it, will get transferred over to the MCP when I ask my editor to use design context from Figma. And this will also work if you copy the link to the selection and bring that in. So I'm going to go in here. We're going to open our chat, our Copilot chat in this case. I'm going to make sure I'm switched to agent mode, make sure I'm using the model that I want to. For this today, I'm just going to use Claude Sonnet 4. And the first thing that I'm going to do, and you can either just prompt it to use Figma. I'm going to use get code because that's something that I like to do. From Figma and implement in demo.tsx. I like being specific with my prompts. It means that our output is a bit more stable. And I'll go ahead and run that.
Maybe while it's running, we can talk a bit about what data we're trying to capture from the design side. And also why you prompt around it a bit and how prompts can be beneficial.
Yeah. So the first thing that I'm trying to get, the data that I'm trying to get is an understanding of what it is that we're trying to build. And that includes layer information, that includes the content that exists on here, that includes things like the styles that are being used. Right? We're using an established design system here. We have our SDS code base. This is using a simple design system behind the scenes, our open source design system that you can go ahead and play around and tinker with. And after the stream, you can go ahead and actually clone this and run these experiments yourself.
Or do it on your own.
Or do it on your own, in your own code base, or starting from scratch entirely.
Yep.
But what we really want to make sure is that our AI agents have as much context as possible, so that as they're iterating through this development and as you're building with it, you're able to have an output that looks and feels more like production code, and is taking into account all the standards that you're used to using, and not just willy-nilly and bringing in random things. So we have in our chat, whoopsies, I'm gonna ignore that.
I didn't know you can do that.
Yeah, this is the magic of live demos. So our chat is telling us that it's gonna help get code from Figma, and it's actually showing us our tool. If I click on see more over here, I'm actually gonna see, oh, I know, this is another Copilot bug. I'm actually gonna see the description of this, and I'm gonna zoom out so I can click on continue. I don't have to do this every time. I just like doing this for our demo purposes so we can take a look. And we can see in the output what's happening. I'm gonna zoom in so everyone on the stream can see this. But you'll notice what we're getting, what kind of data we're actually getting from the Figma MCP. So this is our JSX representation of our design. So it includes data from any code-connected components. All of those references are being included, as well as showing a React representation of what our design should look like. Now, once again, this is not the code that is going to be generated by your LLM, but this helps your LLM parse the data that's in Figma in a format that makes it easier for it to understand. And so we can run through this. We can see all the different design contexts. You'll see different Tailwind classes. As well as down here, we can see that our variable information, the variables that are being used in our design, are coming over, and they're taking into account the code syntax that might exist. Now, this is something that you can do in design to help improve your outputs, to make it more like what you're expecting to see. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. Now, it's also asking to get an image of the selected design to better understand the visual layout. Now, the reason it's doing that is this information is still really crucial when you're developing, to understand a visual hierarchy, to understand where this belongs in the context of your design. It also can be helpful for understanding larger selections that might blow out your context window if you are directly getting code.
This is happening a lot. We can talk about it in a few minutes.
Yeah. Now you'll notice that it's reading the pricing card, and it's starting to actually read through different files in our code base to understand which components it needs.
Let's pause on it for a second and talk about it. Because we hear a lot of people that are asking us, how can we actually make it reuse our components? How can we make sure that the code that we're generating is not a throw-off one? And here, in our example, we actually see that it's doing it. Want to share a bit how you made this happen?
Yeah, and I glossed over this a little bit, partially so we can get into the meat of this. But now that we're seeing it in action, I'm going to go ahead and actually dive into this. So if I scroll back up, you'll notice that after we gave our prompt, our GitHub Copilot said that it used 2 references. And the 2 references that it's using here are, 1, Copilot instructions that we've provided on how to use the design system, as well as a theme.css file that's organizing our design tokens in this code repo. And this file is actually specifically being referenced in our Copilot instructions to front load for our prompts and for our AI agents to look at before they do anything. Now, this file is actually really similar to documentation that you might already create for your design systems and how an engineer should be using it. And that documentation is just as valuable for our LLM agents to be able to understand your context, as well as being able to train them on what outputs make sense, example usage of your components, for instance, or even figuring out how to avoid common pitfalls. Let me jump to that. Where things that we'll notice in our outputs over time, where things aren't quite what an engineer might be doing, or an engineer should be doing, we're able to explicitly describe that and tell our agents to avoid doing this.
I know we're like stretching it before we're actually showing the real result, but I feel like it's a point that we've heard for so many users that it's been so helpful for them to define rules and define the right rules to actually make the code valuable for them. And so I wonder, okay, yeah, we can do it later. Yeah. Like if we can share some best practices, best recommendations.
Oh, 100%.
What people can actually do in their code bases.
Absolutely, and we can even show like those examples in our design file.
I think just like it's really important to state that we know that like the code that is generated is not like a one-shot solution, but the more you're willing to put effort on like setting it up and prompting it correctly or adding rules, the better result you'll get.
Absolutely.
And users are doing amazing rules.
Now, if we go back to our stream, it's asking me to actually run the development server. I already have it running, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. But it's done, and it's created all this output. I'm going to go ahead and keep this and take a look at what we got. And so there's a couple of things that are happening here. So the first things first, once again, it's pretty close, but not exactly there. But another interesting thing is this is actually different from what we're seeing in the design, and there's a really good reason for that.
What do you say buddy here?
So there's that as one. But the first thing is, like, you might notice in our design is actually in light mode. But our final output is in dark mode. And part of the reason that that's happening is because it's using the design tokens that we have set up, and it's recognizing that my system is actually in dark mode.
Nice.
Now, another thing that we're going to take a look at, and we can see that this is pretty functional. It looks like we're having some issues here. Now this is the time where I can go in and bring in my expertise to kind of help massage this a little bit. So first thing first, I'm going to improve some of the styling over here, make sure it looks right. Where are you?
Yeah, I think it's like a really good example. Like we know that it's not a one-shot tool. We're not aiming to be a one-shot tool. We're trying to take all the design intent, if it's the visuals or the behavior, and pass it to the model. So developing would actually be easier and faster.
Let's bring you there. Okay, that does that, and then I want to put this.
What did you even fix there?
Yeah, so the first thing is the alignment is slightly off. It's not taking up the full amount of space, and so we have our align secondary prop here that we can set, but it also combined the two elements when it should be separate. So I'm actually going to put this in its own flex, and then do the same thing down here. And that should, oopsies, introducing some errors here. Let's move this. And here.
I will look at some questions while you're doing that.
Oh, here we go.
Why was I on the wrong channel till now? Yes, sorry about ignoring you.
There we go. And so now we have our design, and it's a lot closer, and we can see that context that's coming over here. Now, one thing that we want to do is we also want to make sure that we're taking into account the right data practices. And it looks like it didn't do it this time, but I'm going to go ahead and just prompt it again and make sure that we're using our annotations. So we actually have this annotation that's mentioning where our data should be coming from, and right now it's matching. This is one of that aspects of like content coming directly from the Figma file. The content is coming exactly from the Figma file currently, but I want it to actually take into account the data that exists in use pricing. So I'm going to do one more time, get code, and make sure to take into account our annotations.
No, you're spoilering it. Spoiler alert, that's a new release.
I was hoping to sneak it in and see if anybody noticed.
I noticed. Does that count?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so actually, maybe while it's generating, worth mentioning that as part of like being an open beta and releasing stuff every week or two, the first thing that we're listing today actually was released. Most of you can see it already, is annotation support. So if anyone is adding to their design file annotations on accessibility, behavior, like animations, you're using it now for pulling the correct content, right? So all of this data will be passed now to the agent as well, so it will generate code with it. So it's just a very cool way to add prompts to your LLM and make sure it will pass through.
It also just kind of goes back to that idea of a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a design file with all this context is worth even more, especially when you're trying to make sure that your prompts are as short and concise as possible. This allows you to bring in that knowledge that our tools will need without you having to explicitly say it all the time.
Totally.
And so we're going to go ahead. We'll notice that in our output, we're seeing that some elements have annotation data. Let's see if we can even find it down here. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Data content annotations. The data is coming from use pricing. Now let's see if our agent understands this properly. Oh, it sees it. Data content annotations. Data is coming from use pricing, and it looks like it's starting to interpret that correctly. It's reading our files. It's checking the existing example to see how it uses pricing data, and now it's going to go ahead and implement it, and let's see if that helps. Now, as you were mentioning, there's a few different ways that you can use these annotations. Right now, we're showing it where the content's coming from, so this could be whether or not it's coming from your CMS. This can include accessibility data. This can even include information about flows and animations. So we've seen some really cool examples so far internally about people using it to create interesting animations that you might not necessarily be able to prototype in Figma.
Totally.
And so it allows you to kind of expand how far the design intent goes on. So our agents continue to check for errors. It's updating the demo component. It's also describing what's been changed. Cool. And I'm going to go ahead and keep these changes and go ahead to our live thing. We'll notice that there was some regression in terms of the design, but the behavior is now taking into account, and the content is now taking into account what was in that mock data. So the first thing is you'll notice is that we're taking into account certain states, right? Advanced is our current plan, but we can switch to business, and now the content changes to downgrade to advanced and downgrade to beginner.
And you can see, we still need to do some tweaks around it. It's
engineering context is really important here, and you still need to guide that LLM output. But now you'll also notice if we switch to yearly, we're still keeping into account this current state that we're in. We can go annual instead of upgrade to annual, or we can downgrade to advanced on the yearly plan or downgrade to beginner, and all that state context is still showing up.
And that came from the annotation, telling you which to grab, which place to grab.
This wasn't something that I had to prompt additionally, except for just use the data that's coming from there.
Amazing. We're getting a question here that we're showing now annotations, but what about variables? And can we write variables back?
Yeah.
So that's actually a good question.
Yeah, great question.
That's a starting point for us maybe to start talking about the next things that we're gonna work on. If we only have 5 more minutes.
What?
Quickly.
Yeah. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about these variables are already coming into play. You can see that in the way that we're seeing we're seeing this in dark mode instead of light mode, as well as in our context down here. We're seeing the different variables that are here. But now let's see what that looks like in the actual Figma design file. So in Figma design, I can go ahead and click on our selection, or I can even deselect everything and see the variables that exist. And these are the different variables that are coming through in our when we're handing over to the MCP. So it's actually only going to hand over variables that are coming from our exact selection, and you can see what that kind of information is in dev mode. When you click on this, we have our spacing values, and you'll notice that the spacing value here is actually differently named from the code syntax that is showing over here. So SDS size space 1600 is different from space 1600. And this is actually coming from our variables table. So if I go down here, it's showing me that variable detail and the fact that we have a code syntax here. Now, this is something that your design teams can set using the variable tables, but this is also something that you can automate using our plugin and variable APIs, so that the code syntax here matches what platforms you're using. So if you're using a specific web platform, you can make sure that your variables are named appropriately and automate that throughout your variable collection.
Yeah. And if what you're looking at is writing back variables, we don't have it yet. But we are collecting now a list of features and requests. And I think maybe this is what they actually meant here. But you can explain better if you want us to answer this specifically. But should we jump to what are people actually asking us? And how could we address that?
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to cover here, is some common questions that we've been getting throughout the beta process. So I know that the dev mode MCP server team is committed to working as publicly as possible when it comes to taking in feedback and talking about addressing that. So how are we addressing some of these questions? Things like if we need to have the desktop app running, things like can they get multiple file selection, how are we handling when our selections exceed our token limits, or even showing Code Connect snippets.
So I think that we can go over them now. Basically, what we're working on now is, well, all this list is obviously, it came from user requests. We got hundreds of user requests and feedback, and everyone are sending us a lot of love requests and hate sometimes, which is okay. But we really, really want to define all of our next plans by what you request. And all of the lists that we have here actually came from our forum, our Asana, how do you call it? Like the
Our task boards.
Surveys,
Yeah, surveys,
that
yeah.
people are filling up for us, which are amazing. Keep doing that. But I think these are the main ones if you want to keep it on screen, and we can like quickly go over them.
Just one more call out. This is how another way to send beta feedback directly.
Yes.
When you deselect things in dev mode, you see the beta feedback button. You can click on that, and that'll open up the surveys for you to take a look.
Yeah. I think let's do a very quick run on these. We have 1 more minute. We can try to stretch it. But go back to them. Mm-hmm. Do I need to have the desktop app running? Yes, you need to have it running, and also it's not only for enabling it, but also you need to keep it running afterwards when you're doing all the calls, the tool calls to Figma.
I want to make a quick call out there. So like one example of that is when you're using the desktop app, you need to make sure you're selecting the thing in the desktop app and not in your browser for the MCP server to properly share context.
Yes. We will be working on remote server soon. We get a lot of requests from everyone. We're exploring it now. We hear you. We'll get there. Can I select multiple frames? This is actually a question that came in a lot, and we've seen some nice hacks around it. Some people want, you know that sometimes you have a Figma frame, a Figma component that has like the component and next to it the documentation around the component. So people want to select both and like send it as one context to the internet. Or maybe they have like a mobile version and a desktop version, and they want to bundle it together. So we will work on a native solution. But until we have it, a nice hack we learned from our users is to actually tell the agent, I'm going to now send you 3 links. Wait until you get all of them before you start implementing. This is the first, this is the second, and then it actually works. So try it. Yeah.
Let's show a quick example of the new annotations feedback in a different scenario.
It's not plugged in. Wait, we're having technicalities. Can we see it? Can we see our screen?
I see us on the screen. We're
Sorry.
live. Awesome.
Wait, we had a slide for it. Go up, go up. Go up to the question.
This one.
Sorry. Technicalities happens. I'm moving. Maybe it's me moving the chair. Okay. Next one. Can we still a few more minutes? What do you all think? Amazing. Let's cover all the questions, I think, before we're doing annotations. One up, one up. Oh, why does it go up? Amazing. Okay. Another request that we're getting a lot is, can we get file level data? Like today, as you said, you need to select something to actually be able to get all the context to your LLM. And we know that you don't always want to select stuff. Sometimes you want, like, I want all the variables in my file, or I want the list of all of my components, or just like file level questions. We will be working on a solution for that as well. We don't have it yet, but it will be coming soon. Should we go next one? Don't want to do all the questions.
Yeah, we can jump into the questions.
Whatever we want to do.
Just a visual preview of the things that are coming. We have in the next week, the next couple weeks, as well as annotations live today, where we'll have asset downloading. We'll even have code snippets. These are your Code Connect snippets being filed as context, and that's the direct snippets. Today, we currently submit the mappings. So the relationship between a design component and the code component, but we don't share the actual Code Connect snippets. And in the coming weeks, we'll be surfacing that as well for even more accurate code generation.
Yes.
And then all the other tasks, all these other topics of rules, more guidance around documentation, the remote MCP server, these are things that the team is actively exploring and hoping to bring to you soon over the coming months.
Why hoping? We will. Just give us a few months.
There we go.
We'll have it. Amazing. So I think afterwards, if people have more questions, feel free to reach out on the forum, on the support channels, wherever. We're trying to be very out there, reading all of your comments, thoughts, and taking them in consideration to what we're actually going to build next. We showed a short glimpse of what we're going to do next, but counting on you all to give us more feedback.
And if you want some more information about how to get started with a dev mode MCP server, take a look at our MCP Help Center that exists on the Figma website. And in a few weeks, we're actually hosting another Office Hours live stream that I think you're hosting.
I think so.
So if you want to keep hearing about this, make sure that you register for that live stream and give us all your feedback.
See you all soon.